This is API Case Files.
Hear this message. Tune this channel. Like E.T. said, phone home.
Hello. Welcome to the latest episode of API Case Files. I am your host, Marsha Barnhart. API Case Files is a companion to API Conversations. In Conversations, we feature a guest in a one-on-one discussion about some area of ufology or anomalous interactions and experiences. In our Case Files podcast, however, we typically examine and discuss reports and observations of unidentified aerial phenomena and the associated interests surrounding the study of that phenomena. And on that note, in this episode of API Case Files, we'll cover in depth two cases. One of mine, this one from County Suffolk, England, and one of our lead investigator, Savannah Dollison's cases, this one from Pensacola, Florida. Also in this episode, API Director Paul Carr and I talk about some of his efforts in the area of API training videos, and we discuss his newly created Witness Supplemental Questionnaire. So let's get started now with this episode 14 of API Case Files. It was clear and starlit in the early hours of Thursday, October 11, 2018. A man, unable to sleep, walked outside and lit a cigarette, drinking in the view of the overhead canopy of stars in a nearly moonless night. It was beautifully quiet in his rural county Suffolk town, and for a short time it was just him and the night alone and at ease together. But at some point a light intruded, well away from him, glowing like a soft yellow incandescent bulb out along the field that backed up to his home. It caught his attention, and he squinted to make out what he was seeing. This light was headed almost straight for him. It was unwavering, absolutely silent, and unidentifiable. The witness in API case 18-023-CE1 recalled his experience to me in a telephonic interview conducted from his English countryside home.
I got up without knowing what the time was, went downstairs to the kitchen, made myself a hot drink, grabbed a cigarette, went into the back garden because we never smoke inside the house. And as quite often, I always look up at the stars because on the clear night we get a fantastic show up in the sky. But this evening, after a few minutes, I noticed an orb, a glowing orb. The best way I can describe it is as though the full moon had dropped from the sky and suddenly it appeared levitating at the end of the field. It had a yellowy tinge and it was heading straight towards me, not directly straight towards me, but my direction. And I kind of shifted my position in the garden to get a better view because there is a tree in my garden and at some point it went behind the tree. But I shifted my position and I was just absolutely astounded to see this thing. And I stood there and watched it. It seemed like an eternity, but it could have only been about 4 seconds. It was travelling quite fast. It wasn't flying high. When it did pass, it passed to my left, my neighbour's house, and it wasn't hugely above the rooftops of the houses. I would estimate maybe 50 to 60 feet at the most. So it wasn't high at all. And I just had an amazing clear view of this thing. Although it was bright, it didn't cast the light onto the ground. It made no noise whatsoever. Absolutely dead quiet. I didn't hear any humming, no noises, not even from the wind as it flew past. You would have thought an object that size, travelling at a fair rate of knots going past you, would create some wind noise. Nothing, absolutely nothing. And off it went. My view lasted for about 4 seconds, but I was so close to it, I would estimate within 200 feet, considerably within 200 feet. Almost to the point, I think if I'd had something in my hand and thrown it at this object, I might have even been able to hit it. But obviously, this was a very rare occurrence, and it just took me totally by surprise. Obviously, on a dead straight line, if something is out there floating in the air, it will be affected by wind. So the fact it maintained the same height and travelled in a dead straight line, it must have been intelligently controlled.
When you're talking about the object, tell me as best you can about the size. If there were any protuberances, please drill down on the object for me.
Okay, it was a perfect sphere, absolutely perfect. It went oval. It was perfectly spherical in shape. There were no identifying marks on it that I could see. It was just this sort of pale, yellowy, bright glow. Made no noise, and I'm guessing it was somewhere between 20 to 25 feet in diameter. As I said, there were no markings on it at all, no variation in colour either. It was the same colour all over, this one glowing sort of soft yellow. And I had an absolutely clear view. It was a crystal clear evening. I've got an uninterrupted view, which probably goes back, I don't know, a couple of miles. It's all agricultural land. The land does vary in height by about 30 to 40 feet. There are undulations. But this thing come fairly close to the back of the field, to the ground. But as the ground dropped away, it maintained its same height. It was on one level. So if it was 30 foot above the back of the field, then by the time it got to the front of the field, it was 60 or 70 feet above where I'm standing. So it didn't change direction. It maintained a dead straight line. It didn't vary from that course whatsoever.
With the field that you're looking at and a vast open expanse, how did you determine how close it was to you?
Because of when it passed the neighbour's house, I could see how close it was to the neighbour's house. Then I got a perspective of distance. When it's in an open field, a wide open space, there's nothing for you to get a perspective of distance. But when it passed my neighbour's house over the roof, that's when I got the perspective of how close I was.
I see. It passed over your neighbor's roof as it transited across the field. It passed over the neighbor to your left's house.
To the side of it, but above roof level.
Uh-huh.
Correct.
So it was about 60 feet above the neighbor's roof?
No more than that. No more.
Uh-huh.
Could even have been less, Marsha.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when things happen in seconds,
yeah,
you try and rationalise it after. You kind of keep replaying it in your mind, and you try to tie everything down.
Yeah.
But, obviously I thought about this a hell of a lot, and it was low. So if I said 60 feet above the house, it could have been 35, 40 feet. At that time, it just seemed quite low.
Well, was your neck craned up?
Yeah. Well, as it passed the neighbour's house, I did kind of try and stick my head out and look round the corner a little bit to see if it had stopped or maybe it had changed direction, but I just couldn't see.
Mm-hmm.
My best guess is that it continued on the course it was already on. I really wanted to shout out, but at 8 minutes past 2 in the morning, I'm sure my neighbours wouldn't have appreciated it. So the next day I told my wife, and really from there, I've told very close friends and family, but, not everyone believes this kind of thing. But there I was with the evidence staring me in the face. I did take a chance, and the following week at exactly the same time, go back out into the garden. And my wife thinks I'm crazy, but I took a flashlight, and my intention was, if I saw it again, I'd flash it to see if it changed direction, came my way. But unfortunately, it wasn't now. It must have been pure chance, and I don't know whether it was there for a specific reason. I don't know. I've lived here 2 years, and this is the first time I've seen anything like that. Nothing whatsoever. So if it was a random occurrence, I probably won't see it again. But I think I'll have half an eye on trying to catch this thing again at some point, but it will be just random. And as I said in my email, there are quite a lot of military bases, both in Suffolk and Norfolk. And as we know, Rendlesham Forest, they got quite a lot of visits. I'm not actually within a few miles of a base, but certainly within Suffolk, there are many, many bases. So whether it had been on a reconnaissance mission or, I don't know. We don't know what technology our armed forces have. I don't think anything like this is currently within their scope.
How did you determine it was a craft vice a ball of such, gaseous plasma passing by?
No, it wasn't gaseous. It wasn't transparent. It was solid. You could see although it had a glow, as it went past, I noticed on one part it seemed to be like a shiny surface.
So it was emanating from within itself. It was not light reflected on it from an outside source, you're certain?
So absolutely not. No, this was the only thing that could have been reflecting on it was the moon. And I don't recall seeing the moon from my garden that evening. And certainly even if it had, no way could have it reflected that amount of light onto this object to make it glow in the way that it did. This was an energy-generated glow. It wasn't a reflection. Much the same as a light bulb. Turning the voltage down on the light bulb until, instead of being a bright light, it becomes a yellowy glow.
Okay. So you're talking about an object giving off its own light about the size of a normal passenger car.
A little bit bigger than a passenger car. I should imagine passenger cars maybe 15 feet in length. I would guess this to be a bit bigger than that. Something like, I don't know if you have them in the US, but so we have Ford Transit vans in the UK, which is like one of the trade vehicles.
Yes.
I know in America you have some large vehicles, but this wasn't huge. But as I said, maybe 20, 25 feet across. 20 to 25 feet high, 20 to 25 feet wide, 20 to 25 feet in diameter across it. It was a perfect ball.
Okay.
It wasn't transparent. The other thing that made me wonder is obviously whoever was inside must have been able to see outside. Maybe from the inside it was transparent, they could see out. I'm not sure. But I couldn't see any windows, none whatsoever.
And you asked around your neighborhood and nobody else saw that you heard from?
No. Well, it's 8 minutes past 2 in the morning. There's not many people around then. And I've kept my eye on any sort of like local websites and such to see if anyone else has reported it.
Uh-huh.
And no.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Maybe after it passed me, it may have shot up. It may have continued on the straight line. I couldn't see. As soon as it passed me and my neighbour's house, I lost sight of it.
Not that it disappeared, but it just went out of your field of view because of obstruction?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
All right. So now this gigantic vehicle comes passing toward you. It came from the east-southeast, you're thinking, right?
It was travelling from east to northwest.
Mm-hmm. This thing came very close to you.
Yeah. Seemed like if I'd thrown something, I could have hit it.
Well, something 500 feet and under is classified typically as a close encounter. So I think I'll...
Well, I wouldn't disagree with that whatsoever.
Now, tell me, did you have any odd dreams or any odd interactions following that incident?
No.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Or any before?
No, not
Okay.
that I can remember.
Now, as the witness mentioned, there are numerous military bases in his area, and my research showed at least 4 large, active Royal Air Force bases within Suffolk. These include RAF Mildenhall and Lakenheath, which are both located close together north-northwest of the witness. They are approximately 15 to 20 miles away as the crow flies, in other words, in a straight line. RAF Barnham and Honington are also located close together. They're about 16 miles as the crow flies north-northeast of the witness location. However, the witness stated that the object came from the east as it traveled past him, in his words, in a dead straight line which did not vary in its trajectory. So I had him trace on an overhead map view the line of travel across the field towards his yard. When I tracked that line backwards, in other words, to the east, it took me straight to a rather infamous point on the map. 30 miles due east on the exact trajectory path the witness described is Rendlesham Forest, just outside the now closed RAF Bentwaters base. This is, of course, simply an odd coincidence, I'm sure. There is no way to determine anything about the starting point or the ending point of the object observed, but it did make me pause and ponder. You may or may not be aware of the Rendlesham Forest UFO case from late December of 1980. This incident involved military personnel from both RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge. It is a famous case still being debated. I have included a link on this incident in our show notes. I could, in the end, find no explanation for Case 18023. If it was some type of unknown secret military craft emanating from a supposedly closed military base, I would have no way of knowing. That's the secret part of secret military projects. But as the witness stated, he couldn't imagine that anything like what he saw was within their scope. Case 18-023 was closed as unidentified. Normally, during a witness interview, I try to determine if the witness has had any other unusual or anomalous experiences, because quite often that is the case, and sure enough, it was in this case also. Have you had any anomalous experiences prior to this in your past?
Define anomalous. You mean seeing the same sort of thing?
Well, some type of experience that defies conventional wisdom or understanding.
I used to live in London. Obviously, we now live out in rural Suffolk. When we was in London, my wife was upstairs and she called for me. This was back in the early 90s. And I went up to the bedroom. She was looking out the window. I said, what? And she said, what do you think this is? And she pointed, and in the distance, it looked like a star. But only after a few seconds, this star started to, if you like, wobble or vibrate very, very fast until it almost became a blur. And then it just suddenly shoots off, maybe, I don't know, half a mile to a new spot, sit there for a while and do exactly the same. Now, we watched it for a good 10 minutes, and after that, how much can you watch it? We went to bed, and during the night, all the burglar alarms and the car alarms were set off in the road, which I found very odd. And when I got up in the morning, my burglar alarm system was completely dead. I mean, dead. It weren't just sort of half working. It was completely dead. So I called the maintenance guys for the burglar alarm, and the guy came down. And I just happened to mention that the previous night, all the house alarms and the car alarms had gone off. And he said, well, this is strange. He said, there's nothing wrong with your burglar alarm system. He said, the battery in there, the backup system, there's a battery. He said, it's just dead. He said, completely drained. There's nothing in it whatsoever. He said, and from what you're telling me, the burglar alarms in the houses and the alarms in the cars all go off automatically. He said, that means only one thing. And I said, you're talking about an EMP. He said, you're absolutely correct. So I can't explain it. That's something that happened in the 90s. It weren't close. It may have been a mile or even 2 miles away. You can't really get any gauge of distance when you see something in the sky that looks like a star. It could be 100 meters away. It could be 100 miles away. You just don't know. Mm-hmm. But that's the only other experience I've had relating to unexplained phenomena.
As investigators trying to see the bigger picture, questions about a witness's past experiences and their beliefs and their background is useful information. The hope is that this information can be correlated into meaningful data. API is attempting to do this through a newly developed questionnaire. In fact, this is one of the things we'll be talking about later in this podcast with Paul Carr. So, stick around for that. It's coming up shortly. Next on the agenda, however, is a case discussion with lead investigator Savannah Dollison.
This is API Case Files.
Aerial phenomena investigations is primarily involved in the identification of objects in the sky. Most witness reports revolve around some unusual aerial sighting. Of course, on occasion, other reports come our way, and we do our best to try to find a plausible, most possible explanation for what the witness reported to have seen or experienced. If we can't find a plausible, most possible explanation, then sometimes we're left with no other accounting than unidentified, but that doesn't happen very often. Most reports do end up having a plausible, most possible explanation, and often the witness is satisfied and relieved as to our findings. Occasionally, API investigates reports that turn out to be most plausibly or most possibly natural phenomena, or psychologically induced illusion or physiologically induced illusion. On rare occasions, something like delusion is the most plausible, most possible explanation. Now, we certainly can't and don't diagnose anyone with a mental illness, but when the witness interview, the investigation of the witness, the stated facts from the witness, and the video or still picture evidence provided by the witness points in that direction, then that's the only path we can take to our eventual conclusion. This next case that lead investigator Savannah Dollison will outline is such a case, and it's a reminder to all of us investigators that sometimes there is no there. All right, Savannah, now let's review your case 18027 that was set in Florida. This was, as I understand, kind of it is an ongoing experience for this witness. So can you kind of lay out the background on that and how you proceeded in your investigation?
Yes. We got a report through the website form on November 17th, 2018. The witness was experiencing these events from November 9th to November 12th, and that's what I investigated. Since then, she's had some other similar experiences that have been ongoing, but it's not different, and there's really not any new evidence. It's kind of on and off for her. But on the 9th, she was at a friend's house in Florida and was outside on the porch taking selfies. And then when she looked back at the photos, she could see something kind of strange in the background and thought maybe there was like people or beings in the background of her photos. So she goes inside that house and is looking out the window into the woods next to the house and sees more of these people and these beings. She describes them as aliens. Some of them look like aliens just like out of the movies. Some of them look like Native Americans, soldiers dressed in like World War uniforms. Some of them are animals. Some of them look like demons, or how you would think of Satan with like red skin and horns on their head. I asked about the ones she said were aliens. She says there were 3 beings outside that looked like aliens, and there was one in the middle that had really long arms and was holding something above their head, and it looked like a megaphone or like a big speaker. And there was another alien next to the one with the megaphone holding a device in its hand. They were green, gray, and their bodies are partly transparent, so you can kind of see the woods behind them. They had black eyes, and the witness believed they may be using these devices to study, observe, or listen to them. So she goes back outside later on in the evening and saw some more of these beings in the woods. She tried to take some pictures, but the pictures that she took at the time, I believe the way she's trying to explain it to me is at the time in the pictures, these creatures or beings were more visible than how they look in the photos now. But she was talking to them and trying to communicate with them. So she's outside and she asks them to acknowledge their presence. Says like, hey, I'm not here to hurt you. If you're out there, please do something, signal that I'm here, that you can talk to me. And they flashed green and red lights at her. Like they could have been their eyes flashing green and red. The feelings that she was getting is that these were all like spiritual beings, and they were kind of coming from different dimensions, and there was something going on that was bringing them all together. And that's why there were so many different types of beings out there. The ones that look like Native Americans, the one that look like soldiers, and some that look like aliens.
Now, during your investigation, when you did the telephonic interview with her, how did she come across?
I think she's being truthful. I think she is describing things that she experienced, and she was very glad to speak to me. Because, the whole idea of like, she didn't want to talk to just anybody because they might think she was crazy. And in fact, she shared her pictures with some friends of hers, and they were like, yeah, I can kind of see what you mean when looking at these pictures, and maybe you did see something, but you really shouldn't talk about it to anybody, and you should keep this to yourself. So that's when she decided to contact API.
She had other witnesses around her during some of these experiences, right?
I think mostly it's that she took pictures and then showed her friends the pictures. So it wasn't necessarily that they were really seeing what she was saying. She was in the car with one of her friends on the way to her parents' house and was kind of pointing things out because they were kind of everywhere. Her first encounter was at her friend's house, but she moved to a couple different locations over this 3-day period. She was at her friend's house, and then she was at a hotel, and then she was at her parents' house. So while she was moving around town, these beings were everywhere. They were often in the woods next to places she was at. Like she was walking down the street and she saw these beings in the woods. And so when she was pointing out some of these things to a friend of hers in the car, it sounded like he was agreeing with her that, yeah, I kind of see what you mean. But they were also saying, maybe it could just be the lighting, or it could be like lightning bugs instead of some kind of being flashing lights at you, or it could be just a weird reflection that you're seeing.
Well, did she sound lucid when she was talking with you, or did she come across kind of wild-eyed?
I think it was a little bit wild-eyed, yeah. I mean, she answered all my questions and was able to like hold a steady narrative, you know? She knew exactly when things happened and could, talk about them in a clear timeline. But she was very focused on, I think, her own beliefs about what had happened. This like spiritual belief that this was like interdimensional beings and they were in some kind of spiritual warfare.
Now, there was one incident where she went to her parents' house and her parents called the police on her. What was that about? Can you outline that?
Exactly. So she was at the hotel, and then a friend came and picked her up, drove her to her parents' house, and that's on the 12th, November 12th. As soon as she got there, she's telling her parents what she's seen, and her parents were like, wow, this is, I think thought that she was kind of out of control, and they were worried about her, so they called the police. The police came and were trying to calm her down, basically. She said there were 3 to 5 officers, and they were like, hey, calm down. We don't want to take you to jail, but we're not really sure what you're talking about. And she tried to point out what she was seeing, because again, they're everywhere. So she sees them in the woods or in the bushes. And so she's trying to explain to the police officers what she's seeing. And, most of them were kind of like, yeah, okay. She believes that one of the police officers saw what she was seeing and just really wasn't able to say so or like acknowledge that that was true. She quoted him as saying, I'm not saying you're lying and we're not going to take you to jail, but you need to calm down. Your heart rate is up and you're sweating. And then that was kind of it. They de-escalated the situation and left.
Now, did you look into this witness's background at all? Did you see if there were any arrests that were public record or, any drug issues? Could you find anything like that?
There were several arrest records for our witness in 2018 in Florida. One of them was for theft. There weren't any specific drug charges. A couple of the records didn't specify what she had been arrested for. But it sounds like there's a bit of a history with the local police department. I wasn't able to actually corroborate her story about the police coming to her parents' house because I wasn't able to get all the information from her to get a records request. I would have needed the address where the call had come from.
You did your due diligence on trying to figure out some background on the witness, and you did find that there's been some encounters with law enforcement, but not necessarily any drug arrests or, arrests for psychosis or anything of that nature.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't specifically get any information on drug use or like mental health issues.
Had she experienced anything prior to November 2018 along these lines, did she say?
No, she said that she hadn't really ever even thought about aliens or anything like that in her life until she had this experience. It just wasn't on her radar. Although she describes herself as someone who's in touch with her energies and has like a belief in the paranormal and has been interested in things like ghosts and spirits, but nothing specifically about aliens. I think that's why this like struck her so powerfully, was the alien thing. It wasn't something that was a part of her belief system at the time.
Okay, well, I find it interesting that her own parents called the cops on her. You know, normally you aren't going to do that. Normally, if you thought your daughter was credible, you would say, "Oh my gosh, well, let's take a look at this." But their first instinct was to just call the cops on her.
I know. It doesn't look good for her that her parents, first reaction was call the police on her. And also that the police's reaction was like, we don't want to take you to jail. We just want you to calm down. And it sounds like a pretty standard, kind of like well check, on a person. They weren't seeing what she was seeing, it doesn't sound like.
There wasn't really any visual evidence in the photos that she ended up actually providing you, or the video that you could see. As far as I could tell from your report of investigation, there was really nothing there.
Right. Yeah. So from the original report that she filed, which are the events from November 9th to November 12th, I never got any photos or video evidence from that time period. The only thing that I got was from like a week or two later, when she started experiencing things again. She took some more pictures and a video and sent them over to me, and she wouldn't actually say what she was seeing in the pictures. She kind of wanted me to figure it out for myself. I couldn't see anything in the pictures that was obviously out of the ordinary. There really wasn't anything in the video, especially, that could be considered out of the ordinary. To me, it sounds like she wants me to find, like, what is it that I'm seeing? She wants me to guess at these pictures of the woods, and she thinks if I can guess what she's seeing, then it must be real, right?
With the information you have, the interview of the witness's background, and the pictures that were provided, what was your determination?
There's a psychological phenomenon known as pareidolia, and it's super common. Like, we've all experienced it. Just like when we look up at the clouds and we're like, oh, this one looks like a bunny and this one looks like a horse. And like the man in the moon, we look at the moon and we say, oh, there's two eyes here and a nose there. And those are super common examples, but obviously that can be exaggerated. The effects of it can be exaggerated in like times of stress or at night. Like if you're walking by yourself, you might think the shadows are lurking a little bit closer or feel a little bit different, depending on your mental state as well.
Yeah, pareidolia would explain the things she was seeing, the optical illusions and tricks of the light and such like that. But her being so, agitated about it, and apparently she was, if her parents called the cops on her, that kind of takes it to another dimension that we aren't capable, certainly, of diagnosing, but any layman, the first thing they would think was maybe she's having some kind of break of some sort with reality, or she might have a mental illness of some sort that her parents are aware of, or she might be doing drugs that is causing this really heightened state. I mean, everybody, as you said, has instances of pareidolia, but we don't run off, and say, oh my God, the aliens are battling the Native Americans in a spiritual battle. So there is some other kind of psychological thing, it would seem, that is going on with this woman. And, having an understanding of pareidolia, in conjunction with that, there is this other psychological oddity that happens that I think is occurring with this lady too, and that's apophenia, which is where a person not only sees things that no one else does, but the sighting and the experience of that informs them that there is something special going on. So in apophenia, they find a special meaning that isn't there. Not only is that actual creature not there, but there really isn't any meaning connected to me seeing a bunny float by in the clouds. And when you get to this kind of area where these things begin to have meaning and you have a heightened awareness and you kind of go off the tracks with it, I think that's kind of what this gal was experiencing, given the information you've provided.
Right. Yeah. Clearly it's something more is going on than, she's just like having pareidolia. And I like that you brought up the epiphania. One of the causes of like this extreme pareidolia can come from drug use, and specifically use of methamphetamines, because you're sleep deprived. And so your brain does like super weird things when we don't sleep. And one of those things is hallucinations, and looking for like shadow people is a very common experience for people that are sleep deprived from drug use. So
we, of course, could not determine that she's sleep deprived from drug use, but we do determine that there is not enough visual evidence that she supplied, or really credibility in what she stated to have experienced, to find other than a pareidolia determination with perhaps apophenia involved here in this case. Yes?
Yeah. And I really wish that she would have sent in some of this other evidence she told me she had, right? From her first experience, the November 9th to November 12th. She said she had a picture of the aliens outside her friend's house, right? In the background of these selfies when she first noticed it. There were like the video of her communicating with them outside and saying, flash your lights or flash your eyes or whatever. A video of that, never got it. She said at one time there were like images inside of like a picture, right? Like there was like a picture of a palm tree in her hotel room, and said I could see them, kind of disguised as the leaves of this palm tree, and took a picture of that, but, never sent it. And so there's just a long list of things that I think if there was more evidence, she would have sent it. And instead, the evidence I got really wasn't what she said it was.
She wasn't even saying what it was. She wanted you to play hide and seek for her. So I suspect all the other stuff that she purported to have gotten on video or as a picture was probably just as much vaporware as that which she sent you. That would be my educated guess on this, knowing all that I know at this point. So at any rate, so that case is closed, and that was a trippy one.
I know. This was a great case. It taught me a lot about like how to interview people and how to put together my reports, and coordinating with you and Paul on how to deal with the process of communicating with a witness and writing a report. It was interesting.
Well, thanks for your report on this, Savannah, and it'll be interesting to see what comes up your way next time. You're up to catch the next case, so God only knows what's going to make its way to your inbox. But keep up the good work, okay?
Yes, thanks, Marsha.
Next up, API Director Paul Carr outlines his recent efforts in investigative processes, public outreach education, and witness data collection. We kind of consider API Case Files a podcast by and for UFO investigators. So passing along information we've gleaned and investigative processes we incorporate has always been one of API's goals. Paul Carr has been studiously producing and uploading to our API YouTube channel videos that help train and educate not only fellow investigators, but the public at large. We sat down recently and talked about some of the topics he's completed and uploaded, and some still on the drawing board.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's not just for API. All of our training material, with very few exceptions, will be available to the public under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. We'll even provide things like scripts and so on if someone wants to tailor it to their own application. But there's been a couple of different missions. One is to inform the public about not only UFOs per se, about which actually very little is really known, but also about the process of investigating UFOs and how the witness gets involved in that and what the witness can expect and so on. So that's one area. And the other area is the training of API field investigators specifically, but really it could be used, 95% of it could be used for any field investigator, not even UFO field investigators, really, just anybody who's doing volunteer investigation of anything unusual or anomalous. So we have a couple of videos. One is a very brief one on what to do if you've seen a UFO. That's clearly a public information project. And I'm sure we'll update that one as we get more sophisticated about how witnesses feel about these kinds of things. The other one is a much longer 13-minute slow walk through our reporting form. And our reporting form is not lengthy, so it's a slow walk. And this is also, I think, quite helpful for new field investigators to walk through that form as well and know what kind of information they can expect to get from it and what kind of information is quite deliberately not there. And we'll talk more about that in the upcoming training videos. Right now, there are plans in the books for at least 20 training videos. And by the time we get to that many, I think we'll have to turn around and redo the old ones. So, yeah, it's a never-ending process. And I also have some kind of fun things planned where we sort of geek out on gear and optics and fun things like that, just because that's kind of the interesting thing that keeps a lot of people going in this business when they're not really learning a whole lot about the phenomena, but they may be having a good time trying to measure it. So after the long step through our reporting form, I thought we'd better go back to basics. So I did a video on this, an overview of our investigative process. Is how we go through the process, where decisions get made in that process, and what kind of activities take place from opening of a case, the reception of a report, which may not even lead to an opening of a case, all the way through to the closure of the case. And that's a relatively short video that just sort of gives an overview, but its purpose is that it will give context to the upcoming videos. But then we took a left turn and did one on the supplemental questionnaire, which is meant to train field investigators on what the supplemental questionnaire is for, but it also should help the public understand it better as well. And I'll talk a bit more about that questionnaire in a moment. Anyway, then the next thing that is currently in development is a very important presentation and also a video, which is intended, as always, for both the public and for our field investigators, but the primary audience is the field investigators, on field investigation ethics. And yes, there have been ethical issues in the past with UFO investigations. And, don't get me started. But I think people like Jack Brewer have done a good job of documenting the kind of problems that have come up and the kind of damage that can be done. So our primary emphasis is on let's not do damage. Let's prioritize the witness's well-being and also do everything we can to assure them of their privacy and anonymity. And so that video is coming out shortly. It's kind of dry, but it's the sort of thing that every field investigator needs to know cold and follow closely. So whereas most of the other material we have will always say, look, there's more than one way to do it. Tailor this to the case. Sometimes you're going to have to find a better way than what you see in this video because the case demands it. But this is not of that nature. This is more like, this is what we always do. It will get more relaxed after this when we start talking about things like field site visits and witness interviews and so forth. But the ethics is something that we're just not going to budge on. And we feel that that's very important, not only because it's the right thing to do, which it is, but also because we really want people to understand that they can trust us, that we stand by some very strong practices to protect their privacy, their anonymity, their well-being. And if the well-being is in doubt, then we will not go barging in. We will step back. And that's important. And I think everybody needs to understand that. Not only witnesses, but witnesses' families and witnesses' friends should understand that. So that's important. And hopefully that'll be out in January 2019. And lots more will follow that. I don't have time to do a lot of videos, but there'll be a steady stream, both training and public information. I know you, Marsha, have done quite a few yourself. So, and I hope that at some point we can add someone else who, after they get some experience as a field investigator, will help us do more of these kind of informative videos, and we'll have a good library. We already have more than 30 out there since we rebooted the video channel last summer. And by this coming summer of 2019, we should probably have more like 40 or 50.
I think the value that those videos and those presentations bring is that it helps keep people grounded. This reminds people that there is a process that a rational person is going to institute to take a look at a particular experience that has been witnessed and reported. There's a process, and that process helps keep you grounded and helps keep you pretty much in the scientific method. And I think that's been lost a lot. So that's the value these things bring. And having more and more of them is going to be helpful, because UFO investigation is kind of an ad hoc thing. There is no other group as big as MUFON, but I think there's a lot of little small groups that we can, share information with, and your videos and your training information is good for that, which kind of brings me to the witness questionnaire, the supplemental witness questionnaire. That's something that you have created, and that you're interested in sharing that with other investigators so that we get kind of a database of what our witness looks like and their belief systems and understandings and such. Can you talk a bit about that, Paul?
Right. Yeah. Well, it dawned on me several years ago that there are a few UFO cases that have radar, visual, so on. Very rare, though. Very rare. Nearly all the cases that are on record are eyewitness reports. So what we're primarily working with are human memories and perceptions. That's our instrument, our scientific instrument, which, as you're probably aware, is not always the best possible scientific instrument. But right in front of us is a source of scientific data. The data is not about the phenomena, whatever that may be, and I won't venture a hypothesis at this point, but what we do have is humans. We have humans, and we can take reliable data about humans. There are a lot of scientists, they're called social scientists, who do this all the time. It's their job. And so as baby steps, we want to take our witnesses and understand what kind of people they are. Because what we have to deal with is human memories, human perceptions. What sort of person reports a UFO versus people who don't? What sort of person believes that high strangeness things have happened to them versus those who don't? I have many thoughts about that, but I really don't know. So what I'd like to do is ask questions that we can measure against the general population. Things like religious belief, age, gender, education, things like that, where we can go out and get the statistics for the general population, and then compare that to our witnesses. So we're going to need a lot of witnesses filling out this questionnaire. And the questionnaire will unquestionably evolve. And I hope to get some real pros involved in shaping it over, it's going to take a long time. And I hope that other investigative organizations will help too. And we can get a profile of our witnesses, and we can cross-correlate that between things like how strange was the case that they reported, how many events did they report. Some people, as you know, will report many, many events over the course of their life. And others just have had this one. And quite often will say, yeah, I had this one, and then when I was a little kid, I saw something weird too. So there's a spectrum of regular experience here to infrequent experience here to only one time. And what I'd like to know is how are those people different from people who don't have any experiences or just from the general population? And, that will tell us how meaningful and how significant our eyewitness data are, because we really don't know. We really don't know what it means to see a UFO. As a personal eyewitness experience with no instrumentation, that's 99.9% of the cases we have. We have a few photos. Most of the photos are, even the good photos we have, the ones that I believe are not very good. So that grew out of the frustration of the fact that people point out, and I think rightly, that eyewitness testimony has problems. It has documented problems in courts of law where people have been sent to prison, even sent to death row based on eyewitness testimony that turned out to be wrong. Not maliciously wrong, just mistakes. So we have to get a handle on that. And we have to remember that human memory is malleable and that human perceptions are variable and subject to influences. And so, obviously, we'd all love to get out there with instruments, with video cameras and infrared cameras and measure real phenomena. I want to do that. We'd all love to do that. But that's not most of the cases we have. So that's what the supplemental questionnaire is for, and I hope people will take an interest and join in with us and share their data with us. We don't have to have names and addresses. We just need to know, what kind of case you have and what the witness said about themselves. So this is a chance to get that data. Now, what we're going to do is, after you document the witness's basic story and you have the evidence collection complete, we're going to ask the witness to go to the website, enter in their case number, and take the questionnaire. So the only identification of them is the case number, which, as you know, for each case, we keep all the data anonymous and private. So they're assured anonymity. And other people can come in and take the questionnaire on a test basis, that it can put in a test case number, which lately we've been calling 18-999. We'd like people now to use 19-999. But, put that in, and then you can fill out the questionnaire. And I think you'll find it interesting. It's anonymous. We don't even need to know your name. We're not even going to ask you your name or your phone number or email address or any of that stuff. You don't have to log in. None of that's required. You just go into the website and fill out the questionnaire. Those volunteer data help us sort of calibrate and see what's going on. And the last section, people can give us their comments and, what questions should you have asked and didn't ask? What questions do I wish you had not asked, and that sort of thing, or that you can't figure out why we should ask that. Of course, any question can be skipped if the person answering the questionnaire doesn't feel comfortable, because some of these things are pretty personal. Then that person can just say, I'd rather not say, and move on. And there are no repercussions. It has no effect on the conduct of the case. It may, to some extent, influence the case conclusions, but only very weakly. We're not going to take the questionnaire heavily into account. We just want to have the data, because if we're going to make any progress in this field, It's not going to be any one smoking gun case. There's not going to be a day the earth stood still scenario where some guy steps out of a flying saucer onto the National Mall. It's going to be comparison of patterns across many cases and establishing somehow that the witnesses are seeing something, experiencing something that seems to have an objective pattern to it. But we need to stop thinking in terms of the witness always correctly remembers and correctly perceives what's out there and what it was. Because, Marsha, you've done enough of these cases. That's not what happens in many instances. So I hope that will open up some new doors. I think we need to move beyond just collecting eyewitness reports as if they were subjective. They are subjective very much in the large. And if anybody has questions about that or suggestions for improvement, we're open to it.
All the training and information videos and presentations Paul just referenced can be found on our webpage at www.aerial-phenomenon.org. This brings us to the end of episode 14 of API Case Files. I've been your host, Marsha Barnhart, and I was joined by my colleagues, API Director Paul Carr and Lead Investigator Savannah Dollison. This podcast is a production of Aerial Phenomenon Investigations. Links in the show notes for this episode can be found at apicasefiles.com. The spoken content of API Case Files is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 4.0 license. All music heard on this podcast is licensed under Creative Commons. This free use with attribution music is deeply appreciated, and we thank the musicians and songwriters for sharing their creative spirit. Featured during this episode was music by Frequency Decree, BioUnit, Blue Sky Black Death, and Jassar. Our intro theme music is a mashup of Alien Chronicler and Boxcat games, and DJ Spooky provides our outro theme music. Visit our website at aerial-phenomenon.org. Here you can find out more about our organization, and you can make a UFO report at this site. Just fill out the form provided as completely as you can, and that will generate a report. You can also make a UFO report to us at www.reportaufo.org. Meanwhile, thanks for joining us, and we hope you recommend API Case Files and API Conversations to your friends and acquaintances.
This is API Case File Series Files.